The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Rebecca Larson, and today I am welcoming back to the show for the first time in a really long time, somebody that I've known for many years, Janet Wertman. Janet, welcome back.
It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I think today we're going to talk about the Seymours a lot, but the subject that Janet and I tend to butt heads on a little bit is Thomas Seymour, and in particular, the dog incident at Hampton Court Palace.
That, yes, you, as I remember, you loved my last book, The Boy King, right up until the point that I had John Check give our little king the dog,
Oh my
a tiny puppy, and then that was kind of like.
This is like the story of my life when it comes to anything Thomas Seymour. As soon as we get to like scandalous parts, I read these books and I go, do I continue forward? Do I continue forward? Because obviously there's some things that I might know that other people don't know. And so I can't hold it against them that they don't know what I know. And yet, it's also usually historical fiction. So it's there to entertain. And that's what I have to remind myself most of the time.
It is not easy. I'm in the middle of. I found a haul of old Jean Plady books, and I've just been going through them. And on the one hand, I'm sitting there going, "Oh no, this is really not what happened," but it's such fun at the same time. So yes, there's a lot of no, that it didn't happen like that.
Well, let's talk about why you decided to write about the Seymours in the first place. And let's talk about the titles of your books too, in case people are unfamiliar.
I started with Jane the Queen, with Jane Seymour, and the reason that I wrote about her was because I originally wanted to write about Anne Boleyn, and I had gotten about 150 pages in to something called The Secret Diary of Anne Boleyn. And
Right.
it was brilliant. It was a dual timeline. Elizabeth's reading her mother's diary. And I was doing research on some subject. And I found out that Robin Maxwell had just published my exact book with my cover. The funny epilogue to this story, though, that I have to add in is that during the pandemic, we formed like an online writers group, and we would meet for happy hour every Thursday. And one day, Robin Maxwell showed up, and I got to tell her that story. And she just laughed and said, "Oh my God, you are the second person to tell me that."
Oh, wow.
So apparently there were a few of us, floating around. But so that's how I started writing about Jane Seymour, because finding out that I couldn't write about Anne Boleyn, it's like, well, Jane Seymour is basically Anne Boleyn, just a few extra months, but it took a while to switch over. And what turbocharged that whole thing was when I realized that it wasn't just Jane's story, it was the story of the entire Seymour family that basically rose up like a beacon and then just faded away with the end of, with the death of her son. So that's how once I realized that it was a trilogy, Jane the Queen became easy to write because it was totally in context. And
Then your next book was Protector Somerset, right?
yes.
I think of the three, I loved that one the most. I just, and I probably, gosh, when did that come out? 2018?
2018?
Yeah, so it's been almost 7 years since I've read that book, but I still think back to it very fondly because I love what you did with that. So when you were researching that book, did you go into it with an idea of who you thought? I'm going to call him Ned because I just feel like it's easier to call him Ned. Did you have a feeling of who you thought Ned was going into it and then come out the other end thinking he was somebody else?
So I was kind of honest in the path to Somerset. And I did have people, I did have them a little bit like looking around going, everybody thinks I'm dour, dry, and opinionated, which is what one of the ambassadors called him. So I always knew he was like that. Um, I I had a little bit of an idea, but I was much more sympathetic to him basically because I was in his head and heard all of his justifications. So I came out really liking him at the end. And my cover, I was so proud of that one. Going into Sudley Castle and seeing that face, because the only other choices I had for a portrait were that one of him looking dry, dour, and opinionated, or the elder statesman, which is not who he was. And, I walked around the corner at Sudeley and suddenly saw this portrait hanging there. And I was like, that's my Edward, with
Yes.
the I'm tortured.
I love that. That portrait is absolutely amazing. And my biggest regret is when I was at Sudley this last summer that I didn't get to finish my tour of the house. And so I didn't get to see any of those things. I think I made it into two rooms in the house before I got pulled aside and then got to meet Lady Ashcombe. And then I ran out of time because I had to go to Wolf Hall.
That would, yeah.
So I have to go
It
back.
must have been more fun. The whole meeting thing would have been more fun. Did you get behind the scenes, like a little bit of a tour behind the scenes?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, not a huge bit, but yeah, just a little bit. But it was one of those days. My trip was just so packed full of stops every day. I felt like there was like five or six places I had to go. And that day it was like in the morning, it was stopping at Sudley Castle, and then it was doing some filming there and taking a bunch of pictures. And like I just really wanted to go to the chapel and walk on the grounds and see the ruins. And when we was first walked into the castle, I was so excited because I'm like, okay, here we go. Now I get to see this place after all of these years, and I'm so excited. And then we started talking to one of the volunteers, and before you know it, I was, meeting up with Lady Ashcombe's assistant and being whisked off into her private little garden and talking to her for like an hour, which obviously was amazing to be able to do that. But after we were done, I was like, do we have time to go back through? Because I really want to finish the tour. And my guide was like, no, we really have to go. We have to be to Wolf Hall at this time. And I was like, oh man, of all the places to get rushed through, that was the one I did not want to.
There is not a lot of Tom left.
Yeah.
There is some of Tom left, but not a lot. A lot of the fun part is looking at the Holbein, the chalk drawings. I mean, like seeing that. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm making you feel bad. Wolf Hall, you got to see.
Yeah. I mean, got to see it's not even the original Wolf Hall. That whole day was kind of interesting because I went to Sudley hoping that I would kind of like feel Thomas Seymour, right? And then I got there and everything is so Catherine Parr centric.
Yes.
And everywhere I went, I just kept feeling like all I could feel was her. I didn't feel him at all when I was there. And that was so disappointing to me because I was just trying to connect with him. And then we went to Wolf Hall and I felt the same. I was like, I don't feel him here. I don't feel anything here because what I'm looking at isn't what he would have seen. Everything is different. There's a different building there. So that was disappointing.
Although there's a funny thing. They're talking about George Washington's axe, and where somebody holds up a thing and goes, "This is George Washington's axe, the actual axe that cut down the cherry tree." Well, the handle has been replaced because it was wood and everything, and the blade was replaced too because that got all kind of rusty. But this axe occupies the same space as the axe that cut down the cherry tree. So that's kind of the same thing. The castles, the places occupy the same space as what it did when he was there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you feel it more like at the tower?
I never got to the tower this trip. So, and that was another one like I really wanted to go, but it just didn't work out in my schedule because I ended up spending more time in Devon than around London. And so I had like one day in London and then it was like just chaos, just trying
What
to
did you
get.
do in London?
Well, that was the day I went to the National Portrait Gallery for the press thing for the Six Wives exhibition. So I was there and I interviewed the chief curator, and then we kind of walked around. Oh, we went to Westminster because I had to go there.
Yeah.
And where else did I go? Everything is just like still a blur. It was like 18 days of blur. I have to go back and look at pictures. But I went to Westminster, went to the National Portrait Gallery, had coffee at a couple places. I went somewhere else, but I don't know right now. I'm not remembering exactly where it was, but it was like quick. And it was a lot of walking, and I wasn't used to walking that much. And so I think we kind of cut that day a little short too.
A lot of walking. Westminster, I just kept on like walking around, and then like every time you turn around, you're bumping into somebody else, you know. It's like, oh. And then when I went upstairs to they have like the special exhibit, they have what they claim to be the Essex ring, the one that Essex was supposed to have tried to send to Elizabeth right before his execution. And that was just one of those, whether or not that actually happened, and I'm not really sure that it did, it still kind of made my knees weak, just sitting there going, ah.
Oh, I love that. And I missed that whole upper level too. I didn't even know when we were there that there was an upper level to go to. It was just so packed. That's the one thing I think people don't realize is how crowded it can be, especially in June. Going there in June, there was just people everywhere. Everywhere you turned, you were like bumping into somebody or standing in a line to see, and there's just tombs everywhere.
You have to go back. I'm sure that there's a lot of stuff to be filmed when you go back.
Yes, for sure, for sure. But let's Path to Somerset. Thank you for saying the title of that book because I completely forgot. That book was fantastic. And then after that, you went to The Boy King, right?
Yeah.
And,
Edward.
yes. So Edward the Sixth, I think, is an intriguing figure from history because he didn't live very long. And all we know of him are, from his diary in particular, and also, a few stories we may have heard. No, oh, I see you made a face there. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about maybe his diary a little bit and what your take from that was.
That was that to me was the core of the book. So his diary is usually pointed to as a way of showing that he had like no emotion, that he was just this monster because of the entry he made that the Duke of Somerset had his head cut off on Tower Hill this morning at 9 o'clock. Period. It's like, oh no, how could you do that? And I saw that really differently. Everybody else says that that is, heartless. I saw that as hiding an incredible amount of emotion. I mean, think of this poor boy and what has just happened. And that was really the only thing that he could get out to describe that. I saw that as just I saw a ton of emotion in there, and I milked it. Because one of the things was there's a question as to whether he intended for his uncle to be executed. He basically left it to the council and, wrote his little agenda for the council that they were going to consider the punishment, or they were going to consider this matter. And somebody added in additional words to that, so that they were going to be consider the punishment and execution of the Duke of Somerset, so that the council believed that he wanted Somerset dead. And the question was, did he discover that? And I had him discover that right before he wrote that to really, because I think the timing was important there. I mean, with the book, you really have to kind of figure out where you want all your timing to go. And I thought that really backed up my own belief that there was an incredible amount of emotion there.
Yeah.
And that he understood that he had been manipulated. And so
That whole time period from the time Thomas Seymour was arrested in January 1549, his execution in March of 1549, then his other uncle is arrested in October of 1549. It was all like so close together that it really does make you wonder what was going on in his head, realizing that he had these two uncles, his family.
Like a free for all. This
Yes.
was just a free for all where they were just like shooting Seymours.
Yeah, exactly. Like, how could he? I guess it's so hard to wrap my brain around who Edward the Sixth was. How could he sit back and watch all of this happen and seem okay with it? I, I I don't understand. That's the part that gets me. Like, Thomas Seymour clearly wanted his nephew to have more power. For whatever reason, he wanted his nephew to be able to come into his own much sooner than he should have. And of course, Somerset was of the opposite. He was more like, no, he needs to stay in his minority until he's 18, and we're gonna rule the country in his stead. And then all of a sudden, it's like it's all just blown up into pieces. Like, it makes me wonder, like, what's your thought on that? I feel like I'm rambling right now.
No, you're not. I blame Dudley.
I always blame Dudley.
That was the really hard part of Boy King, was writing it through Edward's eyes and having to, because come on, we know John Dudley, Warwick, Northumberland, whatever you want to name him, manipulated him mercilessly. And so the question is, how do you show that from the point of view of the person being manipulated? So that was a little bit of a challenge, but I had my critique group who didn't know the story,
Okay.
and they caught on very quickly. It's like, oh yeah, no, we got it, He's being manipulated. But I also gave you Mary's point of view, so that to just start planting a little bit of that, so that she could give her side a little bit. But no, he was absolutely manipulated by Warwick. I, Dudley, Warwick, Northumberland. When the names change, that's always a tough one.
Let's just call him Dudley.
You want to? Yes, I have a rule so in Path to Somerset, Edward was Edward Seymour. And when I referred to, Prince Edward, it was a little bit harder, the boy, the prince, the heir. And then in Boy King, Edward Tudor, the King Edward, the king owned the name. And so Edward Seymour was Somerset, or, it was easy because he became Somerset right at the beginning. So there was no confusion.
Yeah, that is confusing. That's one of the things that I think I've been struggling with in my book, is knowing what to call Somerset. Like, do I call him Somerset? Do I call him Lord Protector? How do you, when you're a writer, how do you choose that?
Is this for your nonfiction or your fiction?
My fiction blew up years ago, so my nonfiction.
For your nonfiction, that is the tough one. I would say you call him what he was at the time. And, with fiction, you can just like use first names, and
Right.
that's I'm deep into my next trilogy right now. So I have a whole bunch of nicknames. So Elizabeth is obviously Elizabeth, but then we have, Liza Fitzgerald. Bess of Hardwick made it easy, but but doing all of that, I feel really bad with the Marys, because the only thing I could really do was Mimi and Missy. Oh, okay, fine.
It's a struggle.
It is a struggle.
Well, I'll figure it out in my book. Right now, I think I go back and forth between Duke of Somerset and Lord Protector, because I'm like, I feel like people know him as both, and I hope I just have some consistency, but it's still a first draft.
All you have to do is anchor it as you go, and then people get it. I always give people a little bit of help. Like, I always have like someone go, oh, Warwick, I mean Northumberland, just to remind people.
That's brilliant. I like that. Okay, so in the writing of Edward the Sixth, you feel like he was manipulated. Do
Yeah,
you feel like he would have been as ruthless of a ruler as his father was?
yeah, I do. I do. Now, ah, so part of that is a story which is probably not true, but I was allowed to use it because it was part of the lore anyway, which is the story of him plucking the bird.
Yes.
And I think that, so it's a 50-50. We know that there was a similar story involving Charles V, like 20 years before this happened. But at the same time, Edward might have heard that story because he was a little kid who read all the history books, and he might have known about that and decided that it was quite effective. So I believe, so at least 50-50 shot that he did do that. I think he would have been crazier than Henry. I do. I, I
Yikes.
that's a bit of an unpopular opinion, but I do believe that that poor boy would have been crazier than Henry.
So maybe we should feel lucky that he didn't live as long as his father did.
I mean, that's the fun part of the whole Tudor story is that when depending on exactly how you frame it, it is almost the inevitability of Elizabeth coming to be the greatest of the Tudors.
Yeah.
It was inevitable from the time that it happened. So,
So as
and
far as the Seymours go, we know the Duke of Somerset was executed, Thomas Seymour was executed. While you were doing the research for this book, did you come across much about their other brother, Henry? Because I feel like he's somebody that is going to be coming to the forefront a little more with Elizabeth Norton's new Jane Seymour book that she's working on. And I'm fascinated by Henry Seymour and his place in Tudor history.
very little. There was so little about him. You kind of have him like pop up over here, pop up over there. And at that point, I apologize, it wasn't worth trying to stick him in there.
Right.
You
We
know,
just don't know enough about him.
to really, it might have been fun to put him there, but there was so much else that the book needed to do. That's the other thing. I used to tell my kids this, and they tell these stories with like absolute horror. I was like, kill your darlings. Talk about the trauma of having me yell at them, kill your darlings. But at the same time, that is what you have to do sometimes when you're writing something and it just doesn't fit. It's, oh, sorry. No, kill that little darling.
Uh, see, now you say that, right? And we got to talk about the dog. I don't, it just,
For the boy king, the dog had to die. The dog had to die because you had a 9-year-old boy who was about to kill the man who was arguably his favorite uncle. And I say arguably only because he made like some, like mean comments, oh, my honest uncle talking about Catherine Parr's brother. But you had a little boy who was about to allow his uncle to die. And, as much as I say that Edward would have been even crazier than Henry, you can't do that. So yeah, the dog had to die. The dog had to die in front of him. We all had to feel it along with him. I'm so sorry.
it's okay because I think my take on this, and most people have an idea of where I stand on the whole dog incident. It just all seems way too convenient to paint Thomas Seymour as the bad guy. He, it's all like he showed up, he dismissed the guards. He went to go kidnap or kill his nephew, and the dog started barking, so he shot the dog, and yet nobody saw him. Like when you talk about the accounts, nobody physically saw Thomas Seymour there. So this is where I have a hard time with him. Like, did this even happen? That's my whole question. Did this event even happen, or is it just a story that was told to make him look bad?
Yes and yes.
Well, I guess that's one way to answer that question.
Yes and no, or some kind of, there is at least one ambassador. It's come down to us for all of this time. But I will give you this. If you read David Starkey's biography of the young Elizabeth, he does not mention the dog. So I will give you that.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things that I'm going to cover in my book and why I think the incident didn't happen. And I think, or at least I hope that my arguments are sound or that at least people have some second thoughts on it and that maybe it's, more of a question mark than a certainty moving forward. Because I just feel like that's what's been used against him for so many years is the dog incident and the Elizabeth stuff. Like those are like the two damning factors against Thomas.
The coining stuff and the paying off pirates and bribing the king. I mean, there was a lot of extra stuff, which, again, if you look at that, it was against the protector's rule. And kind of like with when Edward Seymour was executed, it was not for threatening his nephew, but for threatening, at the time, Northumberland. He was acquitted of treason against Edward VI. And so that when he left the courtroom, the axes were turned away and there was such jubilation. It's like, acquitted. And it's like, no, he's acquitted of treason, but this other little thing is a felony and he's going to die for that too. So it was a similar thing.
I feel like the Seymour brothers didn't, did not stand a chance. Once Edward VI came to the throne, I think they both thought like, all right, this is it. This is our moment to shine as Seymours. We can build this dynasty around our nephew. And then little did they know that some of the men behind them or men who they thought were their allies, like Dudley, would be the ones who would find a way to take them both down.
It's a fascinating thing because they should have been successful. They should absolutely have been successful, and the whole thing should have been, Seymour land from then forward. And then I don't know, it's almost like the astrological thing. Everything changed, like we're supposed to be in some sort of change right now, and poof, it just turned over. But again, we're talking about the inevitability of Elizabeth's rule, so that had to happen.
Yeah, it definitely did. It's too bad that it all played out the way that I did, but it makes for some fascinating history and storytelling, doesn't it?
It's, again, the Tudors have fascinated us for forever. And I think that this is one of the reasons, because every time you turn around, it's like, this is happening and that, and plot twist. A lot of those, a lot of plot twists.
Yes, a lot of them. So the new Wolf Hall series is out. Obviously, we can't watch it here in the United States yet, but we all know how it ends. We all know we know Cromwell is executed in the end. But I wonder, you wrote Jane the Queen a long time ago, and I kind of wonder if your idea of who she was has changed at all over time.
No, it actually solidified. Hilary Mantel's Jane and my Jane are very different people.
Yeah.
Very, very different people. And it's only solidified in me. But at the same time, I did reread the Wolf Hall, the series in preparation for this, because as one does. And her writing is just amazing. I don't buy it in some places, but it's like, okay, I'll skip over that. It's one of those, I don't believe who she says Jane is, but I'll believe her Cromwell. It's like,
right.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
It was an incredible, I hope they do justice, because the ending, and spoiler alert, I'm not giving it away, but the ending was so incredibly powerful in writing, and I'm looking forward to seeing whether they can match that.
They did so well in the last set that they put out. I just remember watching it thinking like this is the most beautiful Tudor series I've ever watched. Like there was so much about like the sets, the candlelight, how it was all natural lighting. I think it allowed us to escape into Tudorland, let's call it that, into 16th century Tudorverse to understand how things looked to them when they were having meetings or dinner at night with candles. I mean, just being able to paint that picture was absolutely stunning.
That is the fun part. That actually got me watching the Lady Jane Grey for I think I made it through one episode. I couldn't go any further than that because it was just no, I couldn't. It was just wrong. And yet, walking through the rooms with all of that, I thought they did a wonderful job there. And but that only gets you so far.
Yeah, I watched the Lady Jane Grey series. I don't remember what channel that was on or what app or whatever, but I remember going into it going, oh, great, here we go. Here's another one that is not historically accurate and it's very modernized. And I ended up really liking it, which surprised me because normally I don't like those types of shows. But I think it was just a fun look and maybe and just another way to get more people interested in Tudor history, which
I think I might have enjoyed it if I had been able to watch it enough to have it come back around.
hmm,
Because that really is, with a lot of books, it's one of the reasons that I rarely DNF or do not finish a book because I'm always, no matter how far down the garden path you get me to go, you're going to have to turn around and bring me back. And I wait for that to really see whether they did it. And I'm told that they kind of did with the Jane Grey series that that they were internally consistent and that worked, but I didn't watch it long enough because I'll be very careful about my books, but TV shows I'll abandon pretty easily.
I do judge them immediately when I see the trailers and I go, oh, great, another one of these or whatever. But I'll give them a shot at least. And usually there's not enough to watch about the Tudors because it's all the same old stuff. So that's kind of exciting. But, there's other programs about different time periods like The Great on Hulu, which is all about Catherine the Great's life.
Fun.
Yeah, I don't know enough about that time period to judge it. So I watch it and I go, oh, this is a great series. I love this. So we're too invested.
Exactly. It's one of the reasons I actually did try. I keep on trying and failing, so I don't know why I would continue to try. But I tried it with Elizabeth Tudor and Elizabeth Tudor Vampire Slayer.
Wait, what? I didn't even know that this existed.
Remember when like the whole Pride and Prejudice and Zombies thing was coming out? They did an Elizabeth Tudor Vampire Slayer.
What?
My thing was realistic enough. It's like, what did I expect?
Oh my gosh.
No, that never happened. It's like, of course, that never happened.
Vampires aren't real. Well, duh. Wow. Wow. There's so many of those series, aren't there? I mean, here's another good one. Reign, right? The one on Mary Queen of Scots.
Yeah, that was another one. I only made it one episode. I couldn't do it. I could not do it. I could deal with the prom dresses that they wore
Yeah.
and the jewels, but just I don't know, having her going to take a walk in the woods alone around the castle. No, 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 no. Anything that is any plot twist that is based on that, I cannot accept. So no, I couldn't handle that.
I feel like the part for me that lost me, and this might seem weird, like I could get past the prom dresses. I could see past that. But it was when they took modern music and tried to make it sound like music from that era where I was like, wait, I recognize this song. Wait, no, you can't do this.
No. So Rain reminds me, my son, when he was about 5, was watching Cinderella. and buying into it, buying into it, buying into it. And then the glass slipper. He was like, no, nobody's going to wear a glass slipper. And it's like, really? You were okay with the fairy godmother, with the pumpkin, with everything, but the slipper is the thing that set you over the edge. And yes, it was. And I buy that. So yes, there's always something that sets us off right over the edge.
Oh my gosh, I love this. I love talking about TV series because I think all of us watch these. If anybody says they don't watch Tudor films or Tudor series, I don't believe them. If you're into the Tudors, you're going to be curious enough to want to see what they're about.
It's yes. What is your take? How are you going to make this different? I mean, that's always the question: is how is this going to be different from anything else that was done? So
Yeah. And
you
it's
know,
like historical fiction is the same, right?
yes. With the Seymours, I was lucky because at the time, this was 2016, nobody bothered with Jane.
No.
Certainly, nobody wanted to talk about Edward Seymour. And then the Boy King, I had nobody had written from his point of view since Mark Twain.
Oh my
and
gosh.
and he did his book ended. The Prince and the Pauper kind of ended when mine began. So I that was my thing. Elizabeth, on the other hand, yeah, join the club.
Oh,
But
I'm curious, what's your impression of Elizabeth as a person in general? Let's go like all the way back from childhood into her reign. How do you see her as a person?
I see her as just a very matter of fact, this is what she has to do. And if you look at her entire, if you squint, it's the same stories and the same people repeated over and over again. The same people. She learned who she could trust when she couldn't trust anybody and kept those people or their kids or grandchildren around her forever. It was the same fights. Robert Cecil and Robert Devereux were getting into the same fight as William Cecil and Robert Dudley. I mean, throughout, it's the same thing. It's just patterns over and over again. And um, she she was kind of stuck. She had a path to walk, and she was smart enough to know um, to hate war, to avoid marriage, and yeah, I love her. I really do. I know a lot of people don't like the person that she became later, but I see everything that she was in her youth, and I'm right. I'm there for her.
Let's talk about something that we discussed before we started recording today, because I find it interesting that it seems like Elizabeth had a pattern with men. And one of the things you and I didn't really talk about is how all of her men after Thomas Seymour very much resemble Thomas Seymour in so many different ways. So let's start off by what you said earlier about the similarities between her and Thomas Seymour, and then later on too.
Um, the so she starts out with the Thomas Seymour thing. Fast forward to Robert Dudley. So I am like trying to remember exactly how to get back into this, but Robert Dudley, when Amy Robsart died, was a very similar situation to when the original thing with Thomas Seymour. She was allowing her passions to shine through or not really caring as much about her reputation, knowing that she had her ladies around her and there was only so much she was going to be doing. And then all of a sudden you have a dead wife. And to proceed any further would have been absolutely deadly. Um, you also get it again when she is with Alençon, and when she walks away from France, she she considered doing that for herself as opposed to focusing on her people and her position. and safety. And she had trouble there. She ended up cutting the hands off the printer of a pamphlet against the French marriage, and she realized that she had made a terrible mistake and just walked away from the whole thing. But yes, that she walks away. She knew the whole. So book 2 of my next trilogy is is about marriage. And it's not about her and Robert Dudley, because it's a much larger story than that. It's the story of her, Robert Dudley, and William Cecil, because there was like, it was triangulating what was going on there, because Robert Dudley was like, marry me, marry me. And William Cecil was going, no, don't marry him, marry this. And so they were at cross purposes, and everything was conspiring to keep her single. And then at the end, she realizes that as she never really had a choice.
Yeah.
And then book 3, everything goes to hell in a handbasket when the choice is gone and the world comes after her. So
she was in such a difficult situation, because we look at her relationship with Thomas Seymour, and it seems obvious that she at least had a crush on him, that she would entertain the thought of marrying him if the council approved. Would you agree?
She would have. I do. I think that now, I think that there is a distinct difference between before Catherine Parr died and after Catherine Parr died. And I think that after Catherine Parr died, yes, I do believe that she would have married him. And I think the fact that she felt the guilt that she felt over the incidents before Catherine Parr's death actually kept her safe from being a little bit too impetuous afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where the real lesson came in, and that's where she was saved.
Yeah. Oh, so many what ifs or could have beens when it comes to that whole time period, isn't there?
There are, yes. I tend to not like alternative histories, simply because once you go down one path, it's like, well, wait a minute, what about so, but
I'm kind of the I'm in the same boat as you two, Janet, because I'll say, like, yeah, somebody says, imagine if Arthur had been king and Henry wasn't. I'm like, how can you even imagine that? Because that's complete. We don't even. I don't even know how to come back to that. Like, how can you imagine something that never was, or know enough about a person to be able to determine what they were going to be like?
You can. I mean, you can kind of. Not that I would do it, but I would kind of make Arthur Tudor a little bit similar to Edward Tudor. Like, the two of them. I mean, and throw Henry Fitzroy into the mix too. 3 of Henry's close male relatives, who all died at 16 from a lung thing. It's like, okay, there's some genetics for you.
Genetics or something nefarious.
No. Nefarious is Robert Dudley. Everybody around Robert Dudley gets poisoned.
Oh, that's right.
Or falls downstairs. One or the other. But he's poisoning so many people.
Oh my gosh.
That is after. This is my next thing. Is after my Elizabeth trilogy is going to be Leicester's Ladies.
Oh my God. He had quite a few, didn't he?
Yes, he did. But this is just going to be Amy Robsart, Douglas Howard, and Lettice Nollis. But that's a fun one. That is definitely a fun series.
I love it. Janet, this has been so fun chatting with you today. Just kind of about everything Seymour, your books. We just kind of covered a little bit of everything today, didn't we?
This was a lot of fun.
And next time I have you on, we're going to talk about your new book, because by that time your new book will be out and we can talk some more about Elizabeth.
Yes, we can.
And just so everybody knows, when do you expect that book to be out in the world?
May 19th. Elizabeth will be released on the day that Elizabeth will be released, because it is not only, the ultimate Anne Boleyn's execution. It was also the day that Elizabeth was released from the Tower after Wyatt's rebellion. So how could I put the book out on any other day? Because this first book will cover that period. I'll be showing off my cover on January 15th, Coronation Day.
Oh,
I've got, all of these like little milestones in there, but that'll be fun.
how
I'm
exciting.
excited for this
I can't wait. I better get a copy of this one so I can read it.
right away.
And Janet, if people want to check out your other books that we talked about today, where can they find those?
Everywhere. Amazon, Kobo, Google, Apple, your local independent bookstore can also get you a copy. Barnes and Noble, yeah, just down the line, anywhere you buy books. I'm trying to think what there's a commercial, wherever you find whatever.
Yeah, Google it. You'll find it. But I will include links in the show notes, at least to Amazon, because I feel like most people probably, if they're going to order online, are going to order through Amazon. And then I figure from there, at least then you'll have the titles. If you don't want to shop on Amazon, at least you have the titles and can go from there. Janet, thank you so much for coming back on the show with me today.
Thank you for having me.
I,
It was a real pleasure.
I look forward to having you back again soon for your book release.
Can't wait.
And that concludes another episode of the Tudors Dynasty podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you love the show and would like to show your support, consider becoming a patron over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Tudors Dynasty. Over there, you'll get commercial-free episodes, early access, and some patron exclusive content as well. If you would prefer to show your support in another way, head on over to my website, tudorsdynasty.com, and click on the shop to see some of the new merchandise that I have available. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.
The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.